You're listening to IRN, the Inception Radio Network, Chicago, Illinois.
The Extraordinary Phenomenon Investigations Council presents Epic Voyages. Come join us as we enter and experience the great mysteries of the world with tonight's host,
Whitney Hall-Ewell.
Good evening. It's our special 4-hour Halloween extravaganza on Epic Voyages on the Inception Radio Network. I'm Whitney, the Whitstir, Whitney Hall. And tonight, Maverick joins me, Dr. Aaron Judkins, and we will be having 2 different guests as well during this 4-hour period. So grab your candy corn, your apple cider. It's time to have some fun as we are gearing up for Halloween coming up later this week. And Aaron, it's great to have you with me tonight. It's going to be lots of fun.
Yes, it is. I'm so excited to do a show with you, Whitney, because this is a first to be able to kind of double team up on a show. I'm going to just kind of sit in the background and chime in every now and then. But what a wonderful lineup we have for you tonight.
Oh, I know.
You need to get the hot chocolate out. You need to get ready, curl up on the couch, whatever it is you're doing. Now, I realize the Cowboys are on. I'm just saying. But you need to tune in, tell your friends, because this is going to be an awesome, awesome Halloween special show here on Epic Voyages.
I know. As you curl up on the couch, you might want to grab a blanket to cover you up from the crazy, like, boogeyman scary stuff that might come. It's gonna be kind of scary, and due to its graphic content, I would say that it's not suitable for young children. We're going to be talking about some heavy stuff tonight, so if you're listening, maybe pop in some earbuds or something, because we don't want to scare the kiddies. But tonight we're going to be talking about vampires, werewolves, and evil archaeology. The first 2 hours we're going to be talking with Bill Schnoebelen and followed by Dr. Heather Lynn. Now, both of us have talked with these guests in recent few weeks past earlier with different topics on Epic Voyages. I talked with Bill about his Cancer Wars DVD and alternative treatments to cancer. And Aaron, you talked with Heather Lynn not too long ago.
That's right. We did another topic on the Sumerian controversy. Tonight's going to be totally different. New topic, new subjects all the way around. It's going to be so much fun.
Yeah, it is. It's going to be great. Well, first off, we have Bill Schnoebelen, and I grew up not celebrating Halloween, coming from a Christian household. We saw it as the devil's holiday, although we would do some fall festival type things. Aaron, did you grow up trick-or-treating as a kid?
Well, initially I did. At some point, my parents moved away from that, and we stopped doing it somewhere around junior high. But and then we started kind of doing something different, for the fall festival. But I originally did early on in my youngster years, and but yeah, it was it's something that I remember doing with my sister.
Yeah. get some candy. It seems kind of innocent, get some candy, knock on the neighbors' doors. But tonight we're going to be talking about maybe some of the hidden things that you weren't aware of about Halloween and just kind of what stepping into all that darkness can do. Tonight's guest, Bill Schnoebelen, he grew up trick-or-treating. Isn't that right, Bill?
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, I'm probably older than either of you, but I was raised in the 50s. And I went out trick-or-treating faithfully every year, dare I say religiously. And, because I like candy as much as the next kid.
Yeah.
There's this element of, it being spooky and you get a little thrill and, all of that. And, and then, of course, back then, you didn't hear anything against Halloween. I mean, at least not in our circles. Mm-hmm. It was, go ahead.
Yeah, and then one of the main things that we heard about was the people were putting razor blades in apples that they handed out to kids, so it wasn't safe even to get the candy. And I mean, that's just one little look at what's going on. But it was initially a Halloween night that kind of sparked your interest in the occult. Is that right? We'll talk about that later.
Yes.
And that kind of escalated throughout the years, your interest in like the supernatural, the occult, to the point that it turned you into one of the most gruesome characters that many of you listening tonight may have dressed up for Halloween. And it's been fictionalized by the names of Dracula to Edward Cullen. We're talking about vampires. Yes. Bill, you were a vampire.
Well, you're jumping right into the deep end of the pool there, but yes, I did, get involved with a group, kind of a cult thing that basically we drank blood, and we believed that by doing so we would live forever, and that when I finally died, that I would become this immortal being, kind of like what you see in some of the movies, although a lot of what's in the movies is total nonsense, like so many things. But yes, that was in the late 70s.
Wow. I know some of you listening right now might be chuckling, going, ha ha, yeah, right. That was the reaction I got when I was telling someone last week about tonight's show. And she proceeded to tell me about a man that she had encountered in New Orleans who had his teeth filed to pointy fangs. And she said he seemed nice and normal as she talked to him. He wasn't, ravenously salivating to bite her in the neck and suck her blood. He seemed like a normal guy. I myself watched the Twilight Saga of films, which we'll talk about more tonight, because I had been told that, vampires are just fantasy. It's not real. That's why you may be laughing tonight. It's just made up. Aaron, have you seen the Twilight films or other vampire favorites that you've watched?
I have to say I haven't. I don't, because of my time, and it's for me, it just wouldn't be entertainment for me. I know that it's very popular though with the youth and the culture today. It's zombies, vampires, very popular. I've been hearing about it. I haven't seen any of it, but I've heard quite a bit about it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very popular in pop culture. It seems like in the past maybe century or so, vampires, werewolves grown in popular entertainment. Like, actually, there's a movie out called Dracula Untold. Bill, have you heard about that one? It's in theaters.
Yes, that's the latest installment of what I call the vampire as Messiah.
Oh, okay.
It's like a subgenre.
Oh, as Dracula as the hero,
not really a hero, but an anti-hero. And someone who literally, and I haven't seen this movie, I don't really intend to see it, but, as I understand it, basically he to say, because what people may or may not understand is that Dracula, the character, is based on a real historical figure, Vlad Tepes, he was like a warlord in ancient Romania. Well, not ancient, like 500 years ago. Yeah. And he's regarded by his people kind of like the way we in America think of George Washington. He was a patriot. He was a hero. He was also very brutal and very savage. And that's probably why, Bram Stoker, the guy who created the literary Dracula, picked up the name, because the name literally means son of the dragon. Yeah. And his father, this Vlad guy, his real father was Dracul, which means dragon. And he was given that name because he joined this Order of the Dragon, which is actually a papal order. From the papacy. It was like a knighthood order that he was had conferred upon him for the purpose of fighting the infidels, fighting them. It was the Turks and the Muslims mainly, which is oddly enough what we're getting into today. But anyway, the more things change, the more things they stay the same. But in any event, so this guy was in the Order of the Dragon, and so his son, Vlad Tepes, came to be known as Dracula because, he was the son of the dragon, and also because he was this very savage guy he did in his life, historically, he did some very unspeakable things. Of course, it was a different time, and, this was like, obviously 200 years before the American Revolution.
And they called him Vlad the Impaler because of the
that's
savage ways that he would,
Yeah, we don't need maybe to go into all that, but he was a very nasty guy, and so the premise of this movie, as I understand it, is that he basically, to save his people, to save his nation from the invading Turks or whatever it might be, Magyars, he went and got these awesome occult / vampiric powers from this evil old, vampire. Mm-hmm. And so it's like, okay, he's like this Messiah figure who came to save his people. And this is not the first time this has come up. I mean, even in the book Dracula, there's a heavy, subtext of him being kind of this dark Messiah. The idea that at one point and this has been in many of the movies, this scene where Dracula, he seduces this woman, usually in the book it's Mina Harker, but in the movies it's different people. And he actually, seduces her and tells her if she drinks his blood that, she will live forever. And then he actually cuts open his chest and has her drink blood from his side, and he actually says, "You are bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh."
Ooh, that's nasty.
And I mean, it's like this weird dark communion service.
Yeah.
And of course, there's this long-standing in the Roman Catholic Church. There's this long-standing icon or symbolism, if you will, of a pelican as a symbol of Messiah gouging open its breast to feed its young, which is a metaphor, of course, for the fact that when Messiah was killed on the cross, his side was pierced with a spear, and blood and water flowed out of his side, and and of course it's that blood that gives us as Christians eternal life. So it's like the Bram Stoker and a lot of the other filmmakers down through the last, it's been about 130 years, have created this kind of dark Christ figure who offers supposedly eternal life. And it's very seductive. Mm-hmm. And it used to be, I mean, if you look at the history, and in my book, Romancing Death, which is a whole survey of this issue of the vampire in popular culture and its spiritual dangers, it is very, very critical to understand that there's this like seduction involved, where originally there was this movie probably about 100 years ago called Nosferatu, A Symphony of Terror. And it was a silent film. It was the first film version of Dracula, although they changed the name of the guy to avoid getting sued. And in it, the vampire looks like a human rat. I mean, he's this really ugly, guy with big pointy ears and teeth like a rat, like a rodent. I mean, none like the vampires you see today that have their canine teeth. And he was just hideous. And it's really a very scary film. And, but now down through the centuries, Dracula and the other vampires, not through centuries, but through the decades, has become more and more sexy.
Yeah. I mean, Edward Cullen, that's like he was on the cover of all the magazines. Every girl, it was like this. It was this romance in the Twilight series. He was attractive. And so was, come on, in the movies, Brad Pitt and Tom Cruise, Interview with a Vampire. Hello, those are the biggest, heartthrobs around. And Johnny Depp in Dark Shadows.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Yeah. And even as far back as 78, Frank Langella, who, of course, is now kind of an elder statesman in Hollywood, he was quite sexy back then, and he played Dracula an adaptation of the stage play. And, he was really the first very, very, romantic looking vampire. And ever since then, it's been getting more so. And of course, that's because, frankly, Hollywood is no, friend of the gospel. I mean, they basically are not very usually, although I know everybody's saying, oh, this is the year of the Bible, and there's all these more Bible-friendly films this particular year, but that's kind of an anomaly. And so they most of the films they've created have been to kind of accentuate the idea of the vampire as being this dark, sexy anti-hero. Mm-hmm. And especially, you mentioned the Twilight series, and that's, to me, especially worrisome, because those are books that are oriented toward adolescent, especially adolescent females. Mm-hmm. And, if you read those books, and when I wrote my book, I had to suffer through reading all because they're giant books. I mean, they're like 600 or 700 pages long. And, it's very seductive, because if you're a young girl, 15, 16, 17 years old, and you're reading these books and you have all the insecurities that the adolescent females in our culture have about their body image, about, will I get a boyfriend, am I popular, am I a klutz, all of these things that's right there in the book. And it's like, here's this, you mentioned this Edward Cullen, who's this gorgeous Greek god-like, vampire. And he basically falls in love with this gawky teenage girl, Bella. And, it's like every girl's fantasy, because here's this gorgeous guy who loves me, and he can make me, sexy and whatever, and he can make me young forever. Because that's what these vampire things promise, is that you'll be forever young. And of course, it's a lie. But yet, adolescents, as we know, sometimes have trouble discerning truth from error, especially when it comes to romance. And so that's the danger of this. And I mean, if you want, we can even talk about how bad a role model this Bella is in terms of being an independent, intelligent woman figure, in today's world. She's not. I mean, she's basically a whiny adolescent who like clings to this guy like a leech, pardon the expression. And I mean, she's like totally like fixated on him, and it's not the kind of behavior that you would want your daughter, to emulate. And yet she's like an iconic hero in the culture of the first decade of this century. Yeah. And it's really, really sad, because a lot of girls are running around saying, oh, I got to find somebody like Edward Cullen to bite me in the neck. And here's the point I think we need to make, because you mentioned how everybody thinks this is just fantasy. Mm-hmm. But, actually, there really are people out there,
So the question asks, are vampires real?
Yes.
Yes.
Well, I'd have to say qualified, yes. Yeah, not necessarily like you see in Hollywood, where they turn into bats and they, fly around, or they turn into mist and seep under your door and things like that. No. But are there really people out there that drink blood and there's this kind of cultic, religious, sexual overtone to it? Yes, there are. And all you have to do, I mean, there's the vampire church. There's all these websites devoted to different, like there's even denominations now of vampirism. There's the sanguinarian vampires that drink blood, and there's the psychic vampires that just live off of soul force, things like that. And then there's even subdivisions with that, and they have all these philosophical discussions. And of course, they also have sectarian fights between them about which is the true vampire. And it's craziness. But yes, and many of these people are kind of deviant individuals. I mean, because you can't, here's the problem. See, from a Bible perspective, and I'm of course a minister of the gospel now. I should maybe make that clear. I no longer do these things. Yeah. And the problem is that from the Bible's perspective, it's a sin to drink blood. I mean, that's given in, like in the Old Testament, it's given in the law of Moses, and it's even also in the books of Acts chapter 15. This is something that is dangerous spiritually to drink blood, to say nothing of hygienically and health-wise dangerous. I mean, you look at all of the weird diseases we have now floating around, in society. I mean, Ebola is just the latest one to be on the public radar. You don't want to be drinking blood. And it says in the Torah, in the Bible, thou shalt not drink blood, because the blood is the life of the soul. And of course, we all understand that. I mean, obviously, if you had no blood, you'd be dead. So, we're to regard that as sacred and not drink it. In fact, you may even know that to this day, Orthodox Jews, if they eat meat, they have special kosher meat, like beef or chicken that has been as much as possible drained of blood before it's delivered to the store to be bought, because they don't want to even accidentally get a little blood in their meat when they cook it. So, this is something that's serious. And so if you, if you're a young woman and you find some, well, I'll say it, some weirdo that is trying to be a vampire, and they say, I'll drink your blood and you'll live forever. When you allow that to happen, and I don't care if they bite the person in the neck, because some of these vampires do that. Some of them have a razor blade or a scalpel, and they'll cut a vein in the person's arm and drink there. I
heard somebody was telling me about the richest of the rich in the Dallas area, that they, I don't know if it's every year or something, they rent out the big Reunion Tower in Dallas, which is this big ball that has a restaurant at the top of it. It's expensive, nice restaurant. They rent it out, and that they have people come that sign documents, saying whatever, they don't have diseases, and then they cut them and drain the blood, and then they mix it with alcohol and drink it as some high class thing.
Really, I hadn't heard about it. It wouldn't surprise me, though. There are, in L.A., I know, because I've talked to police officers that have told me about it. They have kind of underground nightclubs that are devoted to the consumption of human blood. People go there to kind of hook up and drink each other's blood.
Okay, so these people say, I mean, anybody could say, oh, I drink blood, therefore I'm a vampire, and, want to be vampires. So there's the self-proclaimed ones versus are there actually demon-possessed vampires, which, explain that to me, the difference of self-proclaimed versus demon-possessed.
Yeah, in my humble opinion, anybody that drinks human blood has probably got some demonic problems, but there are people within Satanism who have chosen that path. Just in any kind of ecclesiastical situation, there are people for example, in a high church setting like the Roman Church or the Anglican Church, you have people that are nuns, you have people that are brothers, you have people that are priests, and you have people that are lay people. In the same way, in Satanism, you have some people that take this path of becoming a vampire, and to do that, you have to wholly give yourself over to the demonic realm. You have to be basically up to your eyeballs in demons, and you invite them in. And I'm sad to say, I used to do that. I would literally I'd have a little chapel in the home I lived in, this dark room full of candles and stuff and various occult stuff. And I would kneel there and I would beg demons to come into me to give me more power. And it wasn't until Jesus, Yeshua, that's what we call him, is our Hebrew. He actually was an Israelite. That wasn't really his historic name. His name was Yahushua. Until he set me free, really, I was really trapped in this, because it is, I'll tell you this much, it's very addictive. Magic is addictive. The occult is addictive, and blood is very addictive. I mean, there's actually studies about people that have become, just like you have heroin addicts or cocaine addicts, you have people that are actually addicted to drinking blood, and if they don't get it, they go into withdrawal. It's a kind of, in psychology, and I should mention, I have a master's degree in counseling psychology, and it's called in psychology a paraphilia. Which means a kind of weird sexual perversion, to be aroused by either the sight of blood or drinking blood. and yet there's thousands of people that are doing it. And my concern is that parents or other people that are kind of in charge of our adolescent or even younger population think, okay, all this is just good, clean fun. It's fantasy. And they don't realize there are predatory individuals in both the sexual sense, but also just in the sense of what we're talking about here, that would be more than happy to play on your child's fascination with these dark things and draw them in and drink their blood and, horrible other things that we don't even, want to talk about. More and more weird stuff is going on in this world. And that's my concern, is that we don't underestimate the peril of these things because we think, oh, this is like Tinkerbell or something. Well, no, it's not like Tinkerbell.
I like the line that you said in your book, Romancing Death, that you were talking about how parents might think that, wizards and tooth fairy and stuff is just fantasy. And you were like, well, and goblins, you're like, well, I don't know about the first two, but the last one, I know wizards because I was one. There's really no arguing with that. No. And the same thing with you. Wizardry in advance to your vampire stage, which we'll talk about your spiritual journey still ahead tonight on Epic Voyages. And we'll also be taking calls later tonight on Epic Voyages. So if you have a question, you can call in. Coming up in about 45 minutes, we'll be taking calls. And you can also get on the chat room and post questions there as well. To talk to our guest, Bill Schnoebelen, you can call later tonight when we ask for the calls. The number to go ahead and have ready is 888-919-2355. Again, 888-919-2355 if you're listening this Monday night, the 27th. And so now, Bill, I mentioned earlier the demonic possession and stuff. We're talking about the spiritual world manifesting itself in the physical world in like a tangible physical sense. The Bible records angels appearing to humans. It also records demon possession and Jesus rescuing one man from that. So you made it pretty clear that you were not just a self-proclaimed vampire, some kid who likes the goth scene. You're somebody who liked the goth scene and maybe had your teeth filed by a dentist and liked to drink blood, but you actually had this spiritual world manifesting itself in you in a demonic control and power. Is that right?
Oh, yes. And I should just point out, this is before, as far as I can recall, there was a goth scene. I think that sort of came up in the 80s, and this was back in the 70s. So, it wasn't like I was following a trend. Unfortunately, I was kind of ahead of the curve on this. But, you see, people need to understand there are saints, if you will, holy people within the body of Christ, that are really, really sold out for him. Well, in the same way, there are people within the dark realms that are equally sold out to the devil, that are zealots, that will basically do anything for Satan. And I unfortunately was one of those people at one point. And when you are asked, okay, if you want to progress further in this, you have to do such and such a thing. And I said yes. And so I went through this process, and it was very arduous and not a lot of fun. And of course, I was promised all these wonderful things, and it was a total lie. That's the thing I need to emphasize.
Big surprise.
When you see all of these things in these Hollywood movies and everything looks really wonderful and romantic, and like Bella and Edward are going to live happily ever after for 1,000 years, blah blah blah. Well, actually, that's a total lie. And the people that get into these fantasy things, and I'm not saying everybody that sees these movies is going to do that, but the danger is there, especially because with young people, either men or women, young men or women are more susceptible to these kind of romantic, occultic fantasies. And that's the danger, is that they're going to be drawn in.
And I'm reminded of the verse 2 Corinthians 2:11 in the Bible. It mentions talking about in order that Satan might not outwit us, for we are not unaware of his schemes. And that's kind of what we're trying to do tonight, is kind of blow the whistle, kind of unroll the blueprint of the devil, of the evil, the dark side, so that we won't be unaware of it, so that we can stand our ground. Ephesians 6, chapter 6, verse 11, put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. And then it goes on to tell us to put on the full armor of God. So as we continue to kind of unmask this quote unquote fantasy of vampires, tell us your experience, what you've learned as far as we mentioned earlier the fiction of vampires, and you're saying some of this stuff is not true. Tell us, what exactly is a vampire compared to what a lot of these fictional things, say that vampires are? Like, how would you define? We're talking about a demon-possessed vampire, not just a self-proclaimed one.
Well, I can just speak to the few people I knew and myself. We were stronger than normal. But I, for example, I could not go out in the sunlight for more than a few minutes without having like either a broad-brimmed hat or, my arms completely covered and actually wearing gloves, or I would actually get blisters on my skin from the sunlight. This is after going through this change. This wasn't the way I was before. And additionally, I couldn't eat. And that was a total bummer. I mean, imagine going a year and a half without ever being able to eat.
Is that how long you were a vampire?
Yeah,
a year and a half?
Basically, yeah. And the only reason I got out of that whole thing was because a Christian lady started praying for me. And we can talk more about that later. But
we'll talk about
that's
that
the
for
power
sure.
of prayer. But, you can only drink blood. I mean, I couldn't even drink water. If I drank water, it would just sit in my stomach.
Oh,
and really? like it wouldn't even go in, and so, and people might wonder, well, where did you get the blood? Well, I was the head of a coven of, actually several covens of witches. And I had about 4 or 5 women who were more than happy to let me bite them in the neck and take some blood.
Was that because they saw it as some erotic thing, romantic thing, like we talked about earlier?
Yes, exactly. That it was some sort of a weird turn on. And of course, also they thought they'd get occult power from it somehow. And, so I do a different one every other night or so. And then, basically that was how I survived. But you see, like any other addiction, you need more. Just like if you talk to anybody who's been involved in either drug addiction or alcoholism, or the treatment thereof, which I was a drug treatment guy for 5 years in a secular agency, you need more to get the same buzz. And it's true of beer, it's true of whiskey, it's true of heroin, and it's also true of blood. And so I began needing more, and then I began needing more, and I had to get a job where I would work at night. So I got and it's funny you think of a vampire having to have a job, but I needed a job, and
so you could pay like utilities,
right. Oh, well, all the mundane stuff, yeah. And so
I say you wouldn't have to buy food.
No. We ended up, I got a job working in a third shift of a newspaper, putting newspapers in boxes, those tin boxes you see on street corners. And so I was out in the middle of the night, riding around, and I'd see.
Talk about your friendly mailman coming to everybody's house. That's super creepy.
Well, yeah. In fact, I would do that. Some nights they would have me actually deliver papers. Like if a paper carrier was sick, one of the adolescent kids they have delivering papers, I'd have to go do it, and and yeah, you're right. It's a little creepy to think you've got a vampire delivering your newspaper to you.
Coming to your doorstep every day.
Yeah. Well, we never did that. We'd wrap them up in a thing and toss them over the fence, But anyway, the point was, I would sometimes be driving around and I'd see an isolated, like street person or prostitute or something, and I would really feel this bloodlust. rising up within me. And like, I never killed anybody, thank goodness, but I felt this urge to do it, and I would fight it off. But, it was only by the grace of the Almighty that I didn't end up like in a nut house or something,
Well, why did you even bother fighting it off? I mean,
well, because I was, this is the real world. It's not Hollywood. And, I was afraid that I would make a mistake and I'd get caught by the police and I'd end up either, put in the mental hospital or sent to prison or something. And I had a family and, friends and, whatnot. And I didn't want to make that happen. I cared too much and I didn't want to do it. There was still humanity in me. And I know that's because, at an early age, I'd had some experiences with the Almighty. And, I know he had his hand on me. He protected me. Even when I was stupid enough to get into some of these things, he always had his hand on me because he knew the future. And he knew that at some point I would come back to him. At some point I would give my life wholly over to him and that I would be serving him. But, in the meantime, I was being stupid, and that's the bottom line of it. So, anyway, getting back to that, I mean, you basically have to stay indoors during the daytime, and you can't get anywhere near garlic. I mean, just forget garlic,
What did it do?
Well, see, garlic, herbally speaking, is a blood purifier. And it was explained to me this way, that the vampirism is in effect a kind of viral thing, a virus that's transmitted because I drank the blood of this being that initiated me. And so because of that, if I go to the grocery store, like in the produce section, and there'd be this big pile of garlic sitting there 10 feet away, my skin would start to itch. And 5 feet away, forget it. So no more Italian food for me, back then. I mean, I wasn't eating food anyway, and I'll tell you, people don't, they think it's so romantic to be a vampire, but imagine never being able to eat food. Imagine having this boring diet of nothing but blood. That's pretty pathetic, even though at the time it's a thrill, but yet you're caught in this trap and there's no way out that you can see. Because I was really afraid I was going to kill somebody, and I didn't want to do that. There was enough of the old me still there fighting to get out that I was able to hold off on that until, like I said, this lady started praying for me.
So you're saying you can't go out in the sun. You have to exclusively drink blood. You couldn't get near garlic. What other physical changes or things you had to do?
Well, like I said, I had very good night vision.
Oh yeah, and you said you were actually also very strong too.
Yeah, stronger. Than normal. I mean, not like you see in the movies where you're picking up people and throwing them across the room and stuff. But I could tell I was more, and of course because I was full of the demonic. I mean, you look in the Bible, you see it talks about how demon-possessed people, like the Gadarene demoniac, it says that they would tear apart the chains and then nobody could hold them,
Yeah, actually I have that pulled up. Mark 5, a man was possessed. It says, this man lived among the burial caves and could no longer be restrained even with a chain. Whenever he was put into chains and shackles, as he often was, he snapped the chains from his wrist and smashed the shackles. No one was strong enough to subdue him. Day and night, he wandered among the burial caves and in the hills, howling and cutting himself with sharp stones. This man was seriously oppressed and seriously in a lot of anguish because of these demons in Mark 5. So, yeah.
Oh, yeah, yeah. In fact, when I worked in this substance abuse agency, because they knew I was a minister, they'd often send people to me who believed they have devils. And there was this one fellow that came to us, and this guy was so full of demons that they had pumped him full of enough Thorazine to knock over an elephant, and he was still throwing people around the room. And they finally subdued him and got him into restraints and stuff. They had to put a double layer of these leather things on him, and I was able to help lead him to Messiah and then help get him delivered. and because of that, that's why they kept sending these people to me, even though this was a secular, drug abuse agency, because obviously there's a lot of demons in the addiction, world. I mean, people that have addictions. So, this is very real, even though it sounds like something out of a Hollywood movie. The demonic is very real. And yes, you get a limited amount of power from it, but it's all illusory because you're ultimately a slave to these evil desires. You can't control yourself. And then at some point you see that all of this is a lie. And that's what I discovered. I discovered that the whole thing was a lie, but I had at that point no way out of it until this woman started praying for me.
Some people listening tonight to Epic Voyages still might have trouble believing your story. Maybe they're saying, okay, we're talking about drugs. This guy was obviously on cocaine and seeing things, or maybe he had schizophrenia. I mean, how do you deal with that? Obviously, well, I know you talked about you did use cocaine stuff when you were a vampire. That was part of your initiation, right?
Yes, yeah, but once I actually crossed over that threshold, I no longer did it. And I understand that what I'm saying is a little bit hard to believe, but the thing all I can say is, I mean, there are people walking around, who were there with me, who would testify that this actually happened, and I mean, beyond that, there are plenty of other people out there. I mean, we've actually had other people that we have led to Christ out of the vampiric lifestyle, if I can call it that, the vampiric cult. So, it's not like I'm the only person saying this is out there. But on the other hand, all you have to do is get on the internet. You will see there's all these weird vampire churches and vampire this and vampire that. And, it's become very much, it's come out of the coffin, shall we say. I mean, back in my day, when I was involved in it in the 70s, it was very much totally underground. Nowadays, of course, there was no internet back then, obviously, but nowadays, it's very much out in the open. You can see programs about it on the History Channel where they're interviewing people that are practicing vampires, and they're proud of it, and that this is, and again, I'm not saying all of these people are full blown, the kind of thing that I was. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't. But I do know it's very dangerous because, again, if you drink blood, according to the Bible, you open yourself up to demonic attack, and you don't want to invite these things into you because you would not believe what a demonic bondage can do to an individual. You were talking about it a moment ago with this Gadarene demoniac. You're in anguish, you're in misery. And toward the end of this time of my sojourning in the dark side, yes, I was miserable because there was a part of me that was still wanting to do good. And it was just like enchained and in torment because this vampiric black magical side of me was reveling in what it had, and what it could do. And, until the Lord set me free, I was really very, very miserable.
Fascinating. It's Epic Voyages. We're talking with Bill Schnoebelen about vampires. We're also talking about werewolves coming up, and Aaron Judkins, who is with us as well. Hey, Aaron.
Hello.
He's going to be talking with Dr. Heather Lynn. We'll also be taking your calls later on in the evening. If you have questions for Bill about vampires or werewolves, 888-919-2355. We'll be asking for that for you to call that number coming up later tonight, maybe in about half an hour. 888-919-2355. You guys have also been chatting it up in the chat room. We'll be taking maybe some of those chat room questions that you may have as well. Aaron, have you been looking at any of those chat room questions?
Well, there's I've certainly been in the chat room. No questions that I see that's come up yet. So if you got a question and you wanted to go on the air, just go to inceptionradionetwork.com, go to the live chat room, type your question, and we'll get it on the air.
Yeah. Okay. So, Bill, we talked about kind of the climax of your journey there and finally where you are today being a Christian. And we talked about early on that Halloween night that kind of started your interest in the occult. Let's kind of walk us through the different beliefs you embraced on your spiritual journey to where you are today. I know there's a lot in there. You've got the 9-hour video of interview with an ex-vampire that you have available on your website with oneaccord.org. That's with oneaccord.org for that. But just kind of briefly tell us all the different stages and what led to each of those different advancements.
Sure. Well, I mean, I was raised a very devout Catholic, and, I was really, I wanted to be a priest and was very, very devout. But of course, as I mentioned, back then, nobody had an inkling that there was anything wrong with Halloween. And so every year I'd go out trick-or-treating with my friend. And, anyway, this one year, this life-changing event happened. I was out trick-or-treating, minding my own business. It was a beautiful October night. And, walking down the street, and I looked up and there'd been this clear sky, I could just see the stars. And all of a sudden I looked up on an impulse, and the sky was just black with these leathery things, like the arch of the heavens was, if you will, covered with these black leathery shapes. And it's kind of the closest I could say is years later, I went through a cave on one of those tourist tours, and there was this cave that was full of bats that were sleeping. And it looked kind of like that.
Okay.
Very, very frightening. And all of a sudden, as I was staring, because I just was transfixed by this, because mind you, this was like probably 1960 at the latest. I'd never seen a horror movie. I never read a horror book. I had no, context into which to put this, because back then, really, there were very few movies like that, and my mother and father wouldn't let me watch them, So here, these things had eyes, and their eyes started to open, and there were these ruby red eyes, and they kind of bored into me, and I felt this thrill go through me, and I didn't know what I had nothing I could name this, except it felt somehow unclean, and I felt somehow defiled. And I looked. My friend who'd kept on walking, he wasn't looking up at the sky. He'd turn around and say, "Hey, Bill, come on, what are you doing?" He wanted to get more candy. And I looked at him, and I looked back up in the sky, and the sky was normal. Whatever this was had left. And I went on my way, but I was like cold sweat all over me. And I didn't know what to make of all this, and I didn't want to tell my mother about it, because I thought then she'd say, "Oh, you can't go out trick-or-treating anymore." You know how kids are.
Yeah.
And from that point on, I can kind of track a gradual trajectory of getting, first of all, it was, getting involved in interest in UFOs, interest in the paranormal, interest in haunted houses, interest in ESP, all this in high school. And this, nowadays that's not uncommon, but you got to realize this is like in the 60s. And, not many people even knew this stuff existed, and the people that did were regarded as basically whack jobs, And here I was studying these things. And, by the time I got into college, because I still wanted to be a Catholic priest, I had a theologian, a professor of theology, who was a priest, tell me, if you want to be Christ-like, you have to do what Jesus did and study the occult. And he told me this lie, which now there's actually books out about this topic, that he went to India, that our Lord went to India and studied with the gurus, and he went to Tibet and studied with the Dalai Lama, and he went to Egypt and studied with the sorcerers in Egypt. And that's how he was able to do the miracles he did, is that he was actually a magician. There's even a book out. Yeah. There's even a book out written by a reasonably respectable scholar, Morton Smith, called Jesus the Magician. But that wasn't out when I went through all this. That came out in the 80s. And so I believe this guy. I mean, he was a priest. He was a professor of theology. Why wouldn't I believe him? I was like 19. And so I started reading up on the occult. And by the time, I graduated, I had written a guy in England who was the king of the witches, and he had connected me to some people over here in America, and I got initiated as a witch. And and of course Wicca is which is the old English word for witch, is a religion. There's thousands of Wiccans in America.
Yeah, that's what was so interesting to me is one time I found myself working at a store and one of my coworkers said she, had grown up Baptist, but now she was a witch. She was like, I'm just a nice witch. I just read tarot cards and stuff. So I'm kind of like, okay. But I went and walked to the food court with her because we worked in the mall. And as we walked back, she said, there's a lot of witches. She was like, there's one that works in that store and over there. And I was just blown away. She's like, yeah, there's a lot of them. And it was around Christmas time and she gave me like a quote. It wasn't a Christmas present, but she gave her present to me on the 21st, which was the day that the pagans would celebrate.
Oh yeah, Yule they call it Yule. Like we call it Yuletide, but that actually comes from a pagan feast called Yule.
Well, that was my former last name, Yule.
Oh.
My maiden name. So yay.
Whitney, what does that mean? Your last name was Yule?
Yule. I just thought Yuletide, like the Christmas time, but yeah, I guess it is like pagan Christmas. I don't know.
Okay, all right.
Is that like Scandinavian or something, or?
It's Scottish. Yeah.
Oh, really?
So, yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, but anyway, I was like, it was so fascinating and that even in my small little town, she was like, yeah, there's lots of witches. And so, yeah, how many vampires are there? Are we talking here?
Well, I would say considerably less. I mean, and mind you, let me just say something here. Wiccans are basically nice people for the most part. They're not.
She was nice, yeah.
Killing babies. They're not. They are what we call white witches. Of course, they're lost. They need the Lord. They're committing idolatry, but they're mostly innocent people that have been deceived, just like I was. When I was in my 20s, I thought Wicca was a good thing. I thought, that it was this nice nature religion and all of that. And, so on the other hand, you asked about how many, comparatively speaking, I would say probably there's only, like one vampire for every 10 witches in America. It's comparatively a very small subset of the larger occult community because it is more extreme. Very, very few people. I mean, most witches, if you would say, would you like to be a vampire? They'd look at you funny. And, but the thing, let me say something here. Mm-hmm. C.S. Lewis, the famous, Christian writer and also novelist, he wrote the Chronicles of Narnia and Screwtape Letters. He talked about the idea of the occult awakening a kind of spiritual lust. Mm-hmm. And he himself had dabbled in the occult before he was saved because he was like a professor at Oxford, for years before he finally found Christ. And, and he warned, he said, it just like, the physical issue of lust, and that once you're defiled by it, once you're touched by it, you need to just cut it off right away because otherwise it will kind of grow. So like today we hear people that are, addicted to pornography or, sex addicts or whatever however you want to characterize it, it grows on you. And and the addiction to the occult, you start out with something innocent like I did, let's look at Zener cards, ESP cards, or, whatever. And then you get into haunted houses and you get into all these other things. And before you know it, you're practicing, like witchcraft. And then once you're into witchcraft, and in my case, getting back to my personal story, I was led by the guy who ran the occult bookstore in the community I was in to look into the Church of Satan. And of course, at the time I said, I don't believe in that stuff. Witches don't even believe in the devil, because that's typically a witch will tell you that. A white witch will say, we don't even believe in the devil. The Christians made up the devil, which is, of course, not true because the devil's in the Old Testament. But anyway, and so I ended up joining the Church of Satan because stuff in the Satanic Bible made sense to me because my mind was gradually being corrupted. My mind was being increasingly darkened. The more I stepped into these things, the further away I was getting from the light of Christ, and the closer I was getting to this dark, addictive deception. And so I went through, everything from Freemasonry. I went into the Church of Satan, into hardcore Satanism. And finally, what happened was I was getting pretty desperate, as I mentioned, a few minutes ago, because I knew eventually I was going to end up doing something really nasty, and I'd end up, behind bars or something. And every year I had written a check to the Church of Satan to pay my dues, like any other organization. And I got the check back from the bank in San Francisco, which is where the Church of Satan was at that time. And some lady from the bank had written on the check, "I'll be praying for you in Jesus' name." And of course, at the time I just laughed. I thought, this is stupid. This lady is some ignorant born again Christian. What does she know? And I threw the check in the drawer and forgot about it. Well, anyway, literally within a day or two, something just knocked me on my face. I mean, I was shattered. I lost all my occult power. I lost all my vampiric power. I lost my job. I felt sick as a dog. It's like I was going through withdrawal from the occult. I was like, it's like, the Almighty, the Most High, had picked me up and thrown me into spiritual rehab without even asking me. And
I bet you were ticked.
Well, yeah. And I actually, I went into my dark temple and cried out to Lucifer for a sign. I said, "What's going on here?" I'd signed my soul over to the devil and done all these things, and I was supposed to get all his power. And here I felt like something the cat had dragged in. And essentially, I cried out to Lucifer, who I thought was the true, deity. And the Almighty came along and kind of went, "Excuse me, I'll take this call." And he answered my prayer. And what was amazing, you want to talk about a little miracle. The very next day, I got a phone call from these two teenage girls from Chicago. At this time, I was living in Milwaukee. So they were only a little over an hour away. And they said, "We've heard about you. Can we come up and see you?" And I thought, whatever. They were like Satanist groupies. And so they came up, and when they came in to see me, they had brought with them 2 Christian comic books. Now think about this. How bizarre is it that Satanists would bring me 2 Christian comic books about the occult? One was called Spellbound and one was called Angel of Light. And they said at the time, "We wanted you to see these because they're so dumb. They're funny. You got to read these things." They were making fun of them, Well, I looked at them and went, "Yeah," threw them in the drawer and forgot about them. Well, that was the Almighty reaching out to me. And I just was too prideful still. Even though I was in the middle of this horrible situation, I was too proud. Because the ego is where, Satan camps out, is in the ego. And I was too proud to admit that maybe these Christians could be right. So anyhow, the next day, there was a knock on the door. I opened the door, and it's 2 Mormon missionaries standing there. And
just getting lots of knocks. Yeah,
this might surprise your listeners, but I had been told a few years earlier by the Grand Master Druid of North America that if I ever got in spiritual trouble, I should join the Mormon Church. Now, how's that for an endorsement? From the Grand Master Druid of North America, join the Mormon Church. And this guy had actually been a Mormon bishop. And anyway, so I thought, this is the sign. We're supposed to join the Mormon Church, because this Druid guy had told me that the guy that founded the Mormon Church was a Druid and a sorcerer, and that he designed the Mormon Church to be a place where people like me could hang out.
Is that true? Did you find out?
Well, actually, later on, after I got saved, I went back and did the research, and there is a Mormon historian, PhD in history, used to be a professor at Brigham Young University until they fired him. Anyway, and he wrote a book called Early Mormonism and the Magic Worldview. This is back in 1987. And in that book, he documents how Joseph Smith, who's the founder of the Mormon Church, practiced the occult. He did occult rituals in cemeteries. In fact, right up to the day of his death, when he was shot by a mob in Carthage, Illinois, in I think 1844, when they went through his personal effects on his body at the jail or whatever, they found that he had an occult talisman, a Jupiter talisman in his pocket, which like is a magical charm.
Fascinating.
That
All right.
gives him power over women.
Well, we'll talk more about your personal journey in just a few moments. We'll take a breather here, and we'll be back with more vampires and werewolf talk on this Halloween special of Epic Voyages here on the Inception Radio Network. Epic Voyages special Halloween show. I'm Whitney, the Whitstir, here with Maverick. Hello, Maverick.
Hello. How are you guys?
We're continuing our discussion tonight about vampires and werewolves, very Halloween fitting. And we're talking with our guest, Bill Schnoebelen. And Bill, if you haven't been listening to the first hour of the show, Bill was a vampire. Let's just cut to the chase there. And we're just diving in with the gory details, so to speak. And Bill was telling us about his spiritual journey and what beliefs he embraced onto where he is today. Today, he is a Christian. He's no longer a vampire. We talked about how he started as a witch and Wicca stuff. You also joined the Church of Satan and became a vampire, and just any other details you want to add in about your journey there, Bill?
Well, we kind of picked it off at the end there about when I went through 5 years of being in the Mormon church, and basically that's what, the Lord used that to bring me to a point where I was reading the Bible and, actually really trying to figure out what's going on within the Bible, and the Holy Spirit spoke to me. And essentially I ended up understanding that there were things in the Bible that were not really coherent with Mormon theology. And so I ended up getting born again at the foot of my bed in 1984, just kneeling and praying to heaven. I didn't have to have a minister or anybody there, just me and the Holy Spirit. And I got gloriously saved on June 22nd, 1984, and set free at that point from a lot of dark stuff, which 5 years in the Mormon church not been able to do much for. And again, that's basically because they have a different spirit there. They have a different theology and a different thing that is really not part of the Bible. Even though they're good people and they appear to be Christians, they're not. Because, see, this is what the devil does. The devil creates these nice white light looking things like Wicca, like Mormonism, like spiritualism, all the other isms that are out there, and they're like counterfeits. And what's the point of a counterfeit? And I just needed to address this for one. A counterfeit $20 bill is worthless if the picture on it is Mickey Mouse. It's got to look like a real $20 bill. It's got to look so real that almost anybody except like a treasury agent could tell. Nobody could tell. I mean, now they have special dyes and things they can use, but you know my point. In the same way, the evil one will create these counterfeit religions that, if you'll pardon the metaphor, they're like spiritual rat poison. I mean, rat poison is 95% good food and 5% poison, because otherwise the rats that are very smart won't eat it. And in the same way, things like, Mormonism and Wicca are 95% good ideas. And even in the case of Mormonism, ideas taken from the Bible. But then there's that 5% that once you ingest it, once you take it into your heart and make a steady diet of it, it can spiritually kill you. And that's what nearly happened to me. But like I said, I started reading the Bible, and it just liberated me to the point that I was able to, at one point, finally be humble enough to kneel at the foot of my bed and pray a prayer and ask the Lord to save me from my sins and be the Lord of my life. And at that moment, Yahushua, Jesus, came into my heart and kicked the evil one out. And, now I did have to go through some subsequent prayers from a minister to have some of the demons kicked out of me, but that was sort of just a formality. I mean, I was in the kingdom of darkness, and in one moment after praying, I was translated, and that's the word that's used in the Bible, from the kingdom of darkness into the kingdom of light. And then about a year later, the Lord called me into ministry, and I've been basically ministering since 1986.
Wow. Quite a transition there. It's amazing. From one extreme to the other. Talk about that. Yeah. One thing that I thought was rather fascinating was like through all this time as a Satanist, even you were still a Catholic priest. Is that right?
Well, for most of that same period, yes. I kind of laid aside that when I became a Mormon, because the Mormons have their own priesthood. They call it the Holy Melchizedek priesthood. But yeah, I had been ordained a Catholic priest in 1976 in the old Roman rite, and basically I was doing that along with all the other things. And people scratch their heads and think, how could anybody be involved in all these different things and not find some incongruity there?
Yeah, how could you be a Satanist and a vampire and a Catholic priest all at the same time? How does that work?
Well, the funny thing is that, if you look at the history of Satanism, almost all the high-level Satanists were Catholic priests. Even Anton LaVey, this is not well known, but the guy who was the head of the Church of Satan, he actually went to a Greek Orthodox bishop and got consecrated a priest and a bishop by this Orthodox bishop, so he could function more effectively as a satanic high priest. Now, that's not well known, but it is an historical fact. And in the same way, the greatest, best-known black magician of the 19th century, who went by the pen name Eliphas Levi, his real name was Abbé Alphonse Louis Constant. He was a French priest, a French Catholic priest. So even though it seems like this doesn't really make sense, there is this correlation there, because quite often, the whole idea of Satanism is you have to have a black mass, and you can't have a mass without having a priest, and I mean, I know it sounds very weird, but that's how it works. And
what's the black mass?
Well, the black mass is basically an inversion of the Catholic mass. And there's many different versions of it, but basically it's you call on the devil instead of the Almighty, of course, and naked woman is used as the altar, and it's full of all kinds of blasphemous stuff. And in hardcore Satanism, it frequently involves either child abuse or animal sacrifice, or even forbid human sacrifices. But that stuff, that I fortunately was pulled out of there by the Holy Spirit before I ever got that deep. And in any event, so the idea, let me explain one other thing. See, in the Catholic Church, they have this doctrine. It's called transubstantiation and the real presence. And the idea being that quote unquote Jesus lives in this host, this little wafer, it looks like a little white circle of bread. Yeah. And so the Satanists think, okay, if I can get these hosts, and if I abuse the host, it's like I'm torturing Christ. So they thought, that's why, I don't know if you even understand this, but historically, back in the Middle Ages, they started to have locks on the tabernacle in Catholic churches, because Satanists would break in and steal the hosts, these little communion wafers, and run off with them and use them for their rituals. Wow. And they would do, they'd stamp on them or urinate on them or whatever. And by doing that, they would think that they were, somehow abusing the Messiah. Wow. Well, anyway, I mean, this is all kind of dark, superstitious junk. Well, anyhow, somewhere in the Middle Ages, the 15 and 1600s, they got the idea, well, let's just get Catholic priests to do it. So we'll have our own priest. We want to break down tabernacle doors anymore. And so they'd find a priest that could be corrupted, and they'd draw him in. And as we know, historically today, there's a lot of corrupt priests out there, priests that are involved in, pedophilia and all the horrible things that have emerged in the last 20 years or so. And the devil is really good at playing on people's vices and playing on people's weaknesses. And so there began to be this fusion between, now mind you, I'm certainly not saying that all Catholic priests are pedophiles or that all Catholic priests are Satanists. No, but I'm saying that some of them are. And I was such a one, because it was like, two sides of the same coin.
And when you were a vampire, you would do the communion, which in the Catholic belief would turn the wafer into the body of Jesus and the blood, and then the wine into the blood of Jesus. And so you would do that as part of your blood diet so that you could drink the blood?
Yes. I wasn't sure if you'd want to get into that, but yeah, that's exactly what I did. And that way, because see, in Roman Catholic theology, the idea is that within the cup and the wafer is the entire body, blood, soul, and divinity of Yahushua, of Jesus. And so, by taking that, you're in effect drinking however many pints of blood are in a human being. And that was how, for a while at least, I was able to fulfill my cravings for blood.
Now, was it wine that you drank, or did it actually turn into blood?
Well, one time, and I think if you've read some of my books, you know about this. One time I actually had an occasion when I was doing a liturgy, a mass, and it literally turned into blood. The wine did. And there were 3 witnesses there that saw this. And I actually took some of it and gave it to a friend of mine who was a chemist. And he sent it off to a lab. And interestingly enough, when they sent back the report, they said it was human blood, but of a type absolutely unknown. It wasn't like O or B or AB or whatever. It was like human blood, but of a type unknown. And this was, again, in the 70s. I mean, it didn't have DNA testing like we have more recently. So that was all I could do. But yes, I had a few dark miracles like that happen in the course of my occult career. And that's what kind of keeps you going.
Wow. So I like the part in your book, Romancing Death, where you talk about your vampire stuff and you talk about Twilight and things, that you talk about how you were able to justify having so many different allegiances at once. Was that a spiritual guide that you had been consulting, because you were also a medium, told you that they were like blades of a grass in a field, different, you see the different blades, but they all have the same root.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to say that, well, that guide probably was telling you the truth on that one, because the Satanism stuff and all that stuff has the same root, although it may have different blades. It all is stemming from the same thing. And that's how they were like, how the devil was okay with you doing all of that is, I just found that quite fascinating that they actually kind of told you the truth on that one.
Well, yeah, and that's the thing. The devil will tell you 9 truths to slide 1 lie across the plate. In the same fashion, and that's very perceptive remark, because they're like all streams from the same satanic river. They'll package things differently, because the devil is subtle, and he knows, okay, this person might like this kind of thing, and this person might like Wicca, and this person might like Freemasonry and whatever, and in doing so, he has like this smorgasbord of things to distract people from the truth of the Bible.
Mm-hmm. Tell me about when you were a witch and you were a medium, a spirit guide, how they guided you into different things, and you thought that they were of the light.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I was ordained in 1972 to be a spiritualist or spiritist medium. And basically, these were these beings that would come, and supposedly they were, we believed in reincarnation. Spiritualists do, and so do witches for that matter. So the idea is these were beings that had gone through many lifetimes, and they were like ascended masters. They'd kind of got to the point they shuffled off the need to have a body, and they were just pure beings of light, and they were very wise, and they were, of course, supposedly servants of the ultimate light. But of course, we weren't allowed to know what that ultimate light was, and people forget in the midst of all this that Lucifer means light bringer, light bearer. So,
and in 2 Corinthians 11:14 it says, "And no wonder, for Satan himself masquerades as an angel of light." It is not surprising then if his servants also masquerade as servants of righteousness. Their end will be what their actions deserve. So they're masquerading as the light, and they're masquerading as these good people. And it's just so messed up.
Well, yeah, it is. And again, because the devil understands that 99% of the people out there are not going to fall into something that's manifestly evil. So he's going to present these things in a very benign, positive light. I mean, if you were to go into a spiritualist church service, for example, since we're talking about that, they sing all these old-fashioned Christian hymns about the old rugged cross and walking in the garden and amazing grace and all this, and it's like kind of being in a Protestant church, except the preacher, if you will, if you want to call him that, gets up and he goes into a trance, and then some spirit speaks through him. And what people need to understand when they see these like mediums or trance channelers, like on television or in various settings, that what these people have speaking through them are actually demons. They're what the Bible calls familiar spirits, and they are not your friend. And again, like we mentioned a couple of minutes ago, they will tell you 9 truths to get one lie into your heart, because people are deceived enough to think, oh, well, like, let's say we used to do this. We'd have a service of spiritualist stuff, and someone would come, oh, my dear departed father, can I talk to him? Well, of course, the demons are immortal beings. Just think about this for a moment. Okay. They know who this guy's father is. What doesn't matter whether he's in heaven or in hell, they're going to know details about this guy's life.
Okay.
And they're going to be able to say, oh, yes, my son, I remember when you fell off the bicycle when you were 8 years old and I picked you up. And And of course, when this medium has this spirit saying this to this individual, they go, wow, it's really my dad. And they start believing in the lie of spiritualism instead of trusting in Christ. Because these people, the spiritualists, for example, they teach that, quote unquote, Jesus is just another ascended master. He's like one of the greatest ascended masters, but he's no better. Ultimately, he's just slightly better than, say, Buddha or Zoroaster or whatever. And I can remember going to it as when I was a minister, going to a spiritualist camp in the middle of Indiana, of all places, right in the heartland of America. And they had this big monument where they had like busts. It was like a park out in the sunshine, of like about 20 or 25 busts of great spiritual figures, Lao Tzu, Confucius, Buddha, Muhammad, whatever. And in the middle was this slightly larger picture of, quote unquote, Jesus. But yet he is more than an ascended master. He is the Almighty come in the flesh. And the trick that we were taught as spiritualists, now listen to this, how facile this is. We were told, okay, when a spirit comes to you and you're a medium, you ask that spirit, do you stand in the light? Mm-hmm. And if the spirit says yes, then, it's a good spirit. But whoever wrote that rule never read the passage you just quoted out of Corinthians, that Satan comes as an angel of light, and that Lucifer and, Isaiah 14 is the light bearer. So, just to ask, do you stand in the light, that doesn't prove anything. What you need to, if you have a spirit come to you, you need to ask that spirit, who is Yeshua? Who is Jesus Christ to you? And if the spirit doesn't say he is the almighty creator of the universe come in the flesh, then command it to leave in the name of Yeshua. So, and if you say Jesus, that's fine, but we prefer to say Yahushua or Yeshua because it's Hebrew. And the thing is that, because people, again, Hosea 4:6 says, my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. And people wander into these things because they appear to be white light, wonderfulness, goodness, like, believe it or not, the woman in whose home we would host these meetings was the wife of a professor of theology at a Lutheran seminary.
Wow.
That's how easily people can be deceived. Because they think, this is all nice, and we sing hymns, and and they quote just enough Bible to make it seem like it's good, but underneath the surface, it's very dark.
He's a liar and the father of lies.
Yes.
Oh, so I thought it was quite interesting that in your book you also talked about you got a degree, a Catholic, your degree in your Catholic school without even ever having to open a Bible, and that it was when you finally got in there and read the Bible finally have you gone through all this stuff is when it actually hit and when the truth actually came through. Is that right? You never actually read the whole Bible?
Well, I'll tell you one thing. I mean, I never read much of the Bible. I mean, in the Catholic Church, to be fair, they in the Mass they have a place where a little bit of the epistles of Paul are read, and then a little bit of the gospel is read. So you do get the gospel, but you don't get that much of it. You don't get enough of it to kind of really understand the full picture. Because I was a smart kid, but when you're in any of these groups, okay, the Mormons, the Catholics, whatever, or the spiritualists for that matter, you are never when I was a child, we were told don't read the Bible. You're not allowed to read the Bible. Let the priest read the Bible and interpret it for you. And so I begged when I was probably, 7 or 8 years old, I saw the 10 Commandments in the theater, Charlton Heston, the whole deal. Yeah. And I went home and I begged my father, I got to have a Bible. And he says, why do you want a Bible? We had a big family Bible that sat there. It was like this ginormous Bible that was covered in dust, never opened. It just looked good. And then when someone would get married or get baptized or die, we'd write their name in it. That was the only really reason it was there. And so he got me a Monsignor Knox Confraternity of Christian Doctrine Bible. I can still see the thing in my mind. And I started reading in Genesis. But once I got into Exodus, I started getting bogged down because I was only 10 years old. I had nobody to explain it to me.
A lot of numbers.
All the begats and everything. So anyway, that was it. And even getting, like you mentioned, a master's degree in theology, we never had to read the Bible. We read books about the Bible.
That is so crazy to me.
We read Kierkegaard, we read Bjorn Kahm, we read, Karl Rahner, all these theologians and Jesuits and stuff like that. But we never actually went to the source text except for brief little proof texts, and so as a result, it wasn't until ironically I joined the Mormon church that at least they got me reading the Bible, because we were supposed to, there was a 5-year plan where, 1 year you'd read the Old Testament, the next year you'd read the New Testament, the next year you'd read the Book of Mormon, and so on. Well, I started with the Bible, fortunately, and so I finally actually read the Bible, and that's when the Holy Spirit began to work on me. And when I read Romans, and when I read Galatians, especially, like Galatians 1, where, it says, if I, or an angel from heaven, preach any other gospel than the one that I, for example, Paul in this case, preach, let him be accursed. And that kind of put a stop in my Mormonism right there, because, of course, supposedly Joseph Smith got the golden plates that ended up being the Book of Mormon from an angel. And yet, you look at the gospel that Paul preached, which in 1 Corinthians 15, it's basically that, the Lord died on the cross, rose from the dead, was seen of many, and that's the gospel, and none of that, the Mormons believe he rose from the dead, but they add all this other stuff to it. They say, oh, you've got to go to the temple, and you've got to wear the magical underwear, and you've got to do a journal, and you've got to do your genealogy, and you've got to do your home teaching, and they have like 4,000 commandments, that you have to keep in order to be a good, faithful Mormon.
Now we'll talk about the Mormon connection with the Twilight series. If you have any questions that you want to call and ask Bill, former vampire, on tonight's Halloween special, the lines are open at 888-919-2355. If you're listening this night, this October 27th, 888-919-2355. I want to talk about, somebody was asking in the chat room how you became a witch, but I would like you to talk about how you became a vampire. People want to know, like, the juicy stuff, I guess, like, how, what, how?
Well, basically, as I mentioned, I was involved in Satanism, and I was told at a certain point, in order to progress any further, that there was like a fork in the road, so to speak, and I could either choose to be a lycanthrope, a shapeshifter, like a werewolf, or I could choose to be a vampire. And I knew someone at the time who was a lycanthrope, a shapeshifter, and he warned me that it's really painful. It's not something that you want to do if you're faint of heart. And I'd already been kind of intrigued by the whole vampire thing already because it seemed kind of dark and sexy, whereas really, werewolves are dark, but they're not really very sexy. They're kind of big and smelly and hairy and everything. And, so I thought, what the heck, I'll go the route of the vampire. So because of that, I don't want to give all the details because I don't want, don't try this at home, children, that kind of thing. But I will say this. I was given by my mentors a concoction of herbs and cocaine to use and to take increasingly large. And you wouldn't believe how much cocaine I was going through. And finally, one night, what happened was this being came to me. It was supposedly a vampire. I really believe now it was a fallen angel in retrospect, not a vampire. And he sliced open his chest, and I drank the blood from his chest. And part of my training, I should mention, was to build this special coffin. And we give the details and everything of it in this DVD set, Interview with an Ex-Vampire, that you mentioned earlier. But, basically, it was designed to be my incubator. So I drank the blood and I crawled into this coffin. It was like, my mind was just going crazy. And I had to basically spend the whole day in this coffin and then emerge at sunset. And when I came out of that coffin, my DNA had been somehow transformed by this demonic / viral thing that I had consumed. And it actually changed the RH factor of my blood. That's pretty bizarre, but it did. So anyway, that's how it was done. And
you slept in the coffin every night?
Well, no, that would be a little uncomfortable.
Oh,
actually,
okay.
It's during the day because you're out at night.
Well, you slept in the coffin during the day instead of a bed?
No, I did that occasionally, but mostly I had a room where there were light, tight curtains, really thick drapes over the one window in the room. And I stayed there, except maybe once or twice a week I'd have to go in and do the coffin thing. But it was not real comfortable. It was kind of claustrophobic. And, you can imagine sleeping, with a coffin in a coffin. I mean, it's not all it's cracked up to be. And,
and you were married too, so your wife would have missed you.
Yeah.
And in the Twilight Saga, Edward, the vampire, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, Edward is a vampire. He falls in love with a human. They get married, and they end up consummating the relationship, and she gets pregnant and has this half vampire child. Now, you were married to a lady, and she didn't turn into a vampire. Was this ever a thing? Could there be a half vampire person? Did you ever have to worry about something like that?
No, not really. The thing,
it was a main part of the last movie.
No, I know. And the funny thing is that I don't know how to say this delicately, but basically vampires don't do that. They can't procreate. Male vampires cannot, have relations.
Oh, so they're like,
because think
sensuality
about
is
it,
the biting of the neck.
Right, yeah. That's totally what do you want to call it? Transmuted that desire into the desire for blood.
Wow, so that's even really, really ravenous. Yeah.
Yes.
Not only are you hungry, but you're sexually hungry and just.
Well, yeah, and that makes it even worse, and that's what the devil does, just like there are some psychotropic drugs that make you extremely, lustful. Well, in the same way, this kind of occult stuff can make you extremely lustful. So it's a bad thing all the way around because it combines the worst features of the worst appetites of both the human and the animal nature into one horrible package.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I have a question from the.
Yeah.
Okay. I have a question from the chat room. When you no longer enjoyed living the vamp lifestyle and could not eat food, why did you not seek medical attention? And that kind of ties in with a question that I have, like, what sort of long-term physical effects did a blood diet have on your body? I know last time we talked about how you're like kind of a health nut, quote unquote, now. And, you know, is that kind of what, I mean, tell me about your diet and your body and the changes of that. And did you seek a medical attention?
Well, no, because first of all, I was afraid of what a doctor would find. You know, I've never been real fond, and don't take this personally, anybody out there that's a doctor, but, you know, like most guys, I don't really like going to doctors. And, you know, so, and back in those days, I mean, I was marginally employed, you know, so I didn't even have medical insurance of any kind. So I never even thought of that. I knew this was an occult issue. You know, I didn't think there is this weird disease, porphyria, which has a lot of the same qualities as vampirism does. And I knew that. I knew that back then. But, you know, no, I never sought medical attention. Oddly enough, on this diet, you know, you asked about it. I never lost weight, you know. I never gained weight either, you know. But, no, I did okay physically, except it was excruciatingly boring. Plus, you smell. You see, evil stinks. I mean, I hate to say
like
it.
Sulfur?
No, just I mean, you know, let's just put it this way: I had to brush my teeth a lot.
And
teeth. Let's be delicate, you know. Pardon?
The teeth. Did you have fangs?
Yeah, but I don't have to go to a dentist and have them made.
Tell me about that.
When I would, what do you want to call it? When I would be in the presence of somebody and I was, let's just say, thirsty, I could actually hear their heartbeat across the room.
Ooh, super sensitive.
And I would, if I was, you know, hungry, shall we say, my teeth would grow a little. And I would, you know, be kind of in a place at that time when I could, you know, if the situation was right, I could, you know, bite them in the neck, you know. But that isn't, you know, that is not, you know, you don't have to dwell on that stuff. But that's basically what would happen. So, you know.
Well, and you talked about in your interview with the vampire, like you went to the dentist and your saliva had actually changed too. Oh,
well, yeah. That's a different matter. But the fact of the matter is that the vampire bat, there really is a vampire bat. And the fact of the matter is that they have a cocaine-like substance, these bats, that they secrete. They land on like a cow or some other large mammal, and they bite them and inject this substance, which is like cocaine. And some of your listeners might know cocaine is a topical anesthetic, so it doesn't hurt. So the cow could just sit there out in the field and be all sleepy and not even realize this vampire bat is drinking, you know, several liters of their blood, because these little bats drink an amazing amount of blood. So anyway, in the same way, that happened to me. And so when I went to the dentist one time, this fellow was a friend of mine. He was a dental student at Marquette University School of Dentistry, and he started working on my teeth, and he said, "You have this weird saliva. It's really thick." And then he discovered his fingers had gone numb.
Oh.
They actually, it's like he says, "This is like I got Novocaine, which is, of course, kind of a chemical derivative of cocaine, on my fingers." And, of course, that's what dentists use to numb your mouth.
And you're like, "Oh, really?" And you didn't tell him.
Yeah, so he ended up, no, I didn't say. And then he put on gloves, you know, because this is before AIDS showed up and all dentists now wear gloves. But, yeah, it's bizarre. It really is.
Wow. Now, what is it that we're going to talk about werewolves here briefly, but what is it through all this that kept you, that was your goal, that kept you wanting more? Like, what was it?
Well, for me, it was the idea of wisdom. This wisdom that nobody else knows. You know, that's what the word occult means. It literally means hidden. And this is the seduction of all this. And let me just talk about this for a minute, because I think it's an important point. Young people are drawn to the occult because they see its mystery and its promise of either power or wisdom. The idea of knowing stuff that nobody else knows. I mean, kids love that stuff. And, the danger is that if you have not introduced them to Christ, if you have not shared with them the power of the Holy Spirit and taught them about this stuff, that when they go out into the culture at large, they end up, being deceived by these things. Because I remember thinking as a young man in my 20s, this is much more exciting than what I was seeing in the Catholic Church. And I'm sure some young people think that way about, whether they're Baptists or Pentecostals or whatever, because, there is no vitality present in a lot of churches nowadays. The churches nowadays have lost a lot of their fire, and young people want that fire. They want something that's going to be exciting, but in a good way.